Welcome to Questpon's YouTube channel, and what are we doing today? Today we will be running through 35 important JavaScript interview questions with detailed answers and code demonstrations. It is a 100% guarantee that in a JavaScript interview you would at least get 20 to 30% of the questions from this 1 hour of video. And before we move ahead, I would like to share two big gifts to you. So if you go and if you share this video on your Twitter, on your LinkedIn, or on your Facebook account, right? We would give you this beautiful ebook, and this beautiful ebook covers all the interview questions, which are covered in this video with source code. So each question, every question what you see out there, we have source code and demonstration. Even the source code, you will get it, right? So go ahead. Share this video on your Facebook, on your Twitter, on your LinkedIn. And once you share it, please do send an email at questpond@questpond.com, and we would be more than happy to share the ebook as well as the source code. So let us start with this 1 hour of video, right? And let us start with the first question from this lesson. Explain JavaScript is a dynamic language. Now, when this question comes in, many candidates or many developers answer back that JavaScript is a dynamic language because things can change during runtime. Things can change during runtime. Then the interviewer will cross question saying that, what do you mean by things can change? And then the candidate answers back, saying that things means the variable values can change during runtime. And then the interviewer again cross questions you and says that, what do you mean by the variable values can change? Because the values can always change of a variable. And then the candidate answers back, says that, okay, when you say that the variable values can change means the variable can have a number, right? And later on the variable can have a string, and then the variable can have a boolean. Now think about this conversation for a minute. The interviewer had to ask you almost 2 to 3 questions, to come to the right answer. Now how good is that? The interviewer is not getting extra paid for this interview. He is frustrated also. Must be he has commitments, he has project deliveries, and he's coming to this interview and he's finding that he has to work more hard, to understand that you are a right candidate. So tip number 1, be to the point. Come to the point directly. Don't hit around the bush. So now let us go ahead and try to answer this question to the point, right? So JavaScript is a dynamic language means that the data types of the variable can change during the runtime. It can change during the runtime means you can see now there is a small example out here. So in line number 10, we have this variable x which is defined, which has value 0. So in line number 10 and 11, you can see this variable x is a number. So in line number 11, the variable x is a number. You can see at the left hand side, I have used the typeof function to get the data type of the variable. So it is a number. But later on, if you go to line number 12, you can see now when I go to line number 12, it's now a string. And when I execute line number 13, it's a boolean. So dynamic language means that the data types of the variable can change during the runtime. So be to the point. JavaScript is a dynamic language because the data types of the variable can change during the runtime, and JavaScript will not complain about it. How does JavaScript determine data types? JavaScript determines data types by looking at the values during the runtime. For example, you can see in line number 10, there is a variable x out here, and this variable x is assigned 100. So it says, oh, this is variable x, and this variable x is going to get assigned 100. So the data type will be a number. So after line number 10, you can see the data type of the x variable is a number. Now in line number 12, we are saying that x is equal to a string. So as soon as you surpass line number 12, you can see the data type is a string. In line number 14, we are assigning x is equal to true. So after that, the data type becomes a boolean. So JavaScript determines data types by looking at the values during the runtime. How can we determine data type of a variable in JavaScript? To determine a data type of a variable in JavaScript, we can use the typeof function. So this typeof function actually takes up a variable. Like for example, look at this. It is taking up the variable x, And if you call this function, it gives the output that what is the data type. Like example, here it is a number. If you see down again, this is X. So if you give typeof out here, the data type is a string. So to determine the data type of a JavaScript variable, we can use typeof function. What are the different data types in JavaScript? So there are 8 data types in JavaScript, and you can divide this 8 data types, or you can classify these 8 data types into 2 categories. One is the primitive category and the other ones are objects. So in primitive category, we have string, we have number, we have null, we have undefined, we have boolean, we have big int, we have symbol. And then in objects, we have objects. The objects can be like, one is the object of the JavaScript, or it can be your own object, like customer object or supplier object or whatever. So we can classify that category just into objects. So there are 8 data types, 7 which are primitive and 1 which is an object. Now definitely, naming all these 8 data types during the interview, it will look very kiddish, it will look very bookish. So what you can do is you can talk about the most used data type. If you look at the most used data type, which we use day and night, right, is string, numbers, nulls, undefined, boolean, and object. I repeat it: string, number, null, undefined, boolean, and object. Big int and symbol, they are important data types, but they are used under specific situations only. One of the tricks, which many of my students use for this question is to remember the acronym SNUB. SNUB, the word snub with a double N, right? So where S stands for string, N stands for nulls, N stands for numeric, U stands for undefined, and B stands for boolean. Now I can see many seniors out there, raising eyebrows. Are you serious? You want to use these acronyms, right? I'm a senior person, I have cracked so many big projects. So here is the second P, be prepared. Yes, you can be a senior person. You can be one of those rock stars, who has made projects successful. But let's agree, must be to disagree, that we do not keep revising data types now and then. Working in a project is different, and preparing for interview is a different ball game. So I would suggest be prepared. A prepared developer has more chance of cracking a JavaScript interview than an unprepared one. Everything is fair in job and war. What is undefined in JavaScript? Explain undefined data type. So undefined is nothing but, it indicates that the variable has been declared, but it has not been assigned a value. For example, you can see out here on the screen, we have this var y, so y has value 10, right? We have var z, so z is declared and it has been assigned a value shiv, so it has value shiv. But look at line number 12, where we have declared var x, but we have not assigned any value. So if you move your mouse, you will see it is undefined. So undefined is a data type which indicates that the variable has been declared, but the variable has not been initialized. It has not been assigned any value. What is null? Null is a data type which indicates intentional absence of data. Null means it is not an empty string. So when you assign a null value, it means it is not an empty string. It is not 0. It is null. Null indicates an absence of data. Intentional absence of data. Differentiate between null and undefined. Undefined indicates that the variable has been created, but it has not been assigned value. I repeat this. Undefined indicates that the variable has been created. For example, you can see we have said here var x, but we have not assigned any value. So that's why the data type becomes undefined. But in case of a null, we are assigning the value. The variable has been created. We are also assigning the value null, and null indicates it is neither 0, it is neither empty, it is null. It indicates an absence of data. Explain JavaScript hoisting. JavaScript hoisting is a mechanism where variables and function declarations are moved to the top of their scope before the code execution. So while the code is executing, it moves the variables and function declaration to the top of the scope. Means what? For example, you can see here in line number 11, where y is equal to 10, we have created a variable y which is assigned the value 10, right? But if you look at line number 10, if you try to refer y variable in line number 10, you will see that y is undefined. It is undefined. And what is undefined? Undefined means the variable is declared, but it is not initialized. Means we have var y, but it has not been initialized with a value, right? So JavaScript, what it has done is during the execution, during the runtime, it has moved the variable declaration at the top of the scope, right? And please note, one more cross question can come over here. Does hoisting move the initialization values? No. You can see out here again, it is not saying y is equal to 10. It is saying y is undefined. So it has not moved the initialization value until this line number 11 executes. Once the line number 11 executes, yes, then y becomes 10, right? So I repeat this answer. Remember, be prepared for interviews because I have seen many seniors, they know what is hoisting, but sometimes when it comes to explanation, they are not able to explain it. So let me just revise this answer. Hoisting is a JavaScript mechanism where variable declaration is moved to the top of their scope before the code executes. Explain global variables. Global variables are those variables which are accessible throughout the web page or throughout the document. For example, you can see on the screen, I have created a global variable called as x. So this x will be accessible throughout this web page, throughout this HTML document, and also it will be accessible inside any function. So a global variable means it is accessible anywhere throughout the web page. Now the problem with global variables is that it can make your application very hard to debug and buggy. So for example, think about it. You have a global variable here like x, and it is getting manipulated through many functions. It is getting manipulated from many places, and on the top of it, JavaScript is async. So that's why it becomes very hard to debug, and it can make your application very buggy. What happens when you declare a variable without the var keyword? What is the implication of declaring a variable without the var keyword? When you declare a variable without the var keyword, the variable becomes global. For example, you can see here I have this function fun1, and I am actually assigning this value y equal to 100, and I'm not using the var keyword. So what will happen now? It will create this y variable, right? You can see that the y variable is created, y equal to 100, but it is also accessible outside. So if you're thinking that this y variable is only accessible inside this fun1, then it is quite wrong. If you go and if you check, this y is also accessible outside. So the y variable has become global. So if you declare a variable without the var keyword, it will become global. And once the variable becomes global, it becomes very hard to debug. It makes your application very buggy. What is the use of useStrict keyword? useStrict is a directive which says that strictly check if the variables are defined using the var keyword or the let keyword. I repeat the answer. useStrict, when you define useStrict at the top, it strictly checks if the variable is defined using the var keyword. And if the variable is not defined using the var keyword, it will throw up an exception. For example, you can see in line number 14, we are saying y equal to 100. So the variable y is not defined by the var keyword. So what will happen is if you run this, it will throw up an exception. You can see out here, there's an exception out here saying that y is not defined, right? So useStrict strictly checks if the variable is defined using the var keyword or the let keyword. How can we avoid global variable issues? First point, global variables are needed in a project. So it is very difficult to avoid global variable, but we can avoid global variables. I repeat this sentence. We cannot avoid global variable, singular, but we can avoid global variables. As a best practice, what you can do is point number 1, we can put global variable in a proper common namespace so that it is not polluting all across the page. You can see here, rather than going and creating individual global variables like connection string and log directory and so on, what we can do is we can put them into a namespace called as global, so that we know that where these variables are and what we are manipulating. Second, you can go and you can create closure and you can apply module pattern. So module pattern and closure. So you can see this is a closure out here. We will talk about closure separately in separate chapter later on, right? For now, let us try to focus on this answer. Let us try to focus on the overall content of this answer. For closures, we will have a separate session. Okay. So here you can see this is a function inside a function, and this is a connection string, which is a global, which we want it to be global. But what we are doing, we are manipulating or we are getting this connection from a function. So we can create a closure and all your variables are private to the module, but they can be accessed through a proper predefined function. So summarizing, it is difficult to avoid global variables, but what we can do is we can use namespaces, closures, and organize things well. Explain closures. What are closures in JavaScript? Now, before I start here, I want to make a very important statement. Closures is one of those areas, where the interviewer can really take you for a ride. So let's try to deal with this question very delicately, very cautiously. And remember the 3 P's which I talked about: be practical, be to the point, and be prepared, right? So let us try to put down a very simple definition out here so that we don't get into those closure controversial questions, right? The most simplest definition which I can put for a closure out here is that closures are stateful functions. Closures are functions inside functions, and they make a simple function stateful. I repeat this answer. Closures are function inside a function. You can see it's a function inside a function, and it makes a normal function stateful. Now let us try to understand this statement, right? So you can see here we have 2 functions. One is a very simple function and another one is a closure. So you can see the way we write closure, we have a function inside a function, and this function is exposed in the return out here, right? Now when we call a simple function, you can see I'm making a call to a simple function out here. The state is, it is stateless. The state is not remembered. You can see it executes this where x is equal to 0, it makes it 1, and after that the stack is cleared, the memory is cleared. Now when you make a second call, for example, I'm making a second call out here to the simple function, you can see again x starts with 0, right? But in case of a closure, now look at this is a closure. In case of a closure, I can hold a reference. I can hold a reference to it, and I can say that no, don't let go these memory variables. That makes the function stateful. So you can see here, this is a closure function out here, and it is exposing out an increment function. And this increment function, what it does is it increments the variable, right? So you can see now I have holded a reference. You can see I'm holding a reference to the closure, right? And now if I go and make a call, so this x becomes 1, and because my reference has still not been released, and if I again make a call, you will see that the value is remembered, and now x is equal to 2. So here now the function has become stateful. So putting down in very simple words so that we don't get into those controversial questions of closure. Closure is a function inside a function, and it makes a function stateful. It makes a function stateful. The next connected question which will come around is, what is the need of closure? What is the use of closure? The only one goal of closure is to create self-contained functions, to create self-contained code, to create self-contained module. And when you create something self-contained, you have a self-contained state. And when you have a self-contained state, that means you are avoiding global variables. Remember, I discussed about the problems of global variables, how it makes your code messy. So one of the biggest benefit of closures is that it helps you to avoid global variables. It creates self-contained functions and self-contained state. So you can see here, this is the closure function, right? And you have this var x. Now this var x is only available within this function, right? And if you want to go and manipulate this var x, then you have to manipulate via the functions of the closure. For example, you can see by calling increment, you can go and you can increment x. If you want to get the value, you will use this function get x value to get the value, right? There is no other way you can go and you can manipulate this variable. So you can see that now we are creating self-contained code. The other big benefit also of closure is that it helps you to expose only what you want. Because when you say self-contained functions, right, you want to have control saying that, see, I want to make only these methods public. So you can see here, we have three functions here, increment, get x value, and init. Increment and get x value is made public. So you can see in the return, I'm saying that yes, anybody from outside can call the increment and get x value, but you cannot call init. In the return, I have not exposed out init. So this is again one of the biggest benefit of functions, of closures. Abstraction, show only what is needed to the external world, right? So this init is called from the function, right? But it is not available outside. So you can see out here, if you see this code, if we try to run this, so I'm going to go and, so you can see now increment. So this is the closure. This is the var x. Now if you want to go and change var x, it is only via the increment function, right? If you want to go and get the value, it is only via this get x value. You can see here get x value, right? And we get that in the alert. I have incremented twice, so that's why it is saying 2. Now this init function is private to the closure. You can see this init function is private to the closure because I have not specified it in the return. So what will happen is when I try to make a call out here, I'm expecting an exception. So if I make a call here, you can see init is not a function, right? So by using closures, you can write better code. You can create self-contained functions, self-contained state. Now in the interview, right, let's try to put that one sentence before the interviewer, right? So that, we don't try to talk about the whole story here. So closures are useful to create self-contained code, self-contained functions that leads to a self-contained state, and we avoid global variables. What is IFI? Explain IFI. IFI stands for immediately invoked function expression. IFI stands for immediately invoked function expression. Remember that sometimes, if you are not able to say the full form of acronyms, it can be very embarrassing, right? So immediately invoked function expression. Now let's talk about the definition of IFI. So IFI is nothing but it is an anonymous function. So anonymous function means it does not have a name and it gets immediately invoked. It is self-invoking. So you can see here we have a function here which does not have a name, and you can see this 2 round brackets here which says that invoke this function immediately. So the way we write IFI, function without the name, curly bracket start, curly bracket end, and then a round bracket saying that we have to immediately invoke it. So you can see here, as soon as this function is created, it gets invoked. You can see that alert out there, it gets invoked. And the second thing about IFI is that any kind of variable we use inside IFI, it is local to that function, to that anonymous function. So you can see this y variable was local. It won't be accessible out here. So the y variable does not spill out as a global variable. So you will get an error out here. So you can see the error in the console. If you see very quickly, if I just run this, you can see out here, y is not defined, right? So putting the whole answer together, IFI is an anonymous function which gets invoked immediately, and any kind of variable we create inside IFI is local to IFI. In this section, we will try to answer 3 questions. What is the use of IFI? What is name collision? And how a normal function is different from a IFI? Now, all of these three questions are connected and can come in different forms during the JavaScript interview. So let us first start with name collision, because I feel that this is the root cause of all the three questions answer, right? Name collision happens when you name the same variable names or method names in the same context. For example, you can see on your screen out here, we have created an init function. And just after this init function, at line number 17, we have created a variable called as init. So that means that we are trying to use the same name, the same function name, and the same variable name in the global context, in the window context, right? So because of this, what will happen now, you will get an error. So if you see out here, you get an error that init is not a function. So what has happened? This function init, after line number 17, it has become a variable. Remember I said JavaScript is a dynamic language. A function can become a variable, an integer can become a string can become an object, right? Anything can happen in JavaScript because it is a prototypical dynamic language, right? So this became a variable and you're trying to still think that it is a function and you've got an error. So name collision happens when you have the same variable names or method names in the same context defined. And this is the one of the sole reasons, why IFI exists. IFI solves the name collision problem. So what is the use of IFI? It solves this name collision problem. Why is this name collision happening? Think about it. It is happening because your function has a name. So if your function does not have a name, that means an anonymous function, then you won't have name collision, right? So what we can do out here is we can go here and we can say that let's not create any function name with the name init. So we'll just say create an anonymous function and write our initialization code in this, right? And invoke it. So you can see now this won't give any exceptions because the variable init is there, right? And it is not colliding with this IFI out here because the IFI does not have a name. So IFI solves the name collision problem. Now, one of the cross question which is always asked around IFI is that what is the difference between a normal function versus a IFI? Means if I go and if I create a function init like this, right? And I call it, how it is so different from this. As we have seen in this demo, right? The time you create a function with a name, you can have a name collision, right? So when you create a function with a name, you can have a name collision, but while in case of IFI, you will not have a name collision. And that is the only big purpose of IFI, to not have a name, to not have a name collision. Explain design patterns, what are design patterns, and which is the most used design pattern in JavaScript. Design patterns are time-tested solutions. For example, if you want to go and create a single instance of an object, you can use singleton pattern. If you want to minimize chatty object messaging, we can try for mediator pattern and so on. So design patterns are time-tested solutions. Now, in detailed discussion of design pattern is definitely out of scope in this video. But I would advise to check my architecture interview questions, where I've explained in more detail on how to answer architecture questions, right? Now, which is the most used design pattern in JavaScript? Well, the most used one, and which every interviewer wants to hear, is the module design pattern or the module revealing pattern. Module pattern is the most used design pattern in the JavaScript community, and it helps in two ways. Point number one, it helps you to create self-contained independent components, modules, namespaces that helps in loose coupling and well-structured code. So that is the first point. And the second important point is module pattern provides encapsulation, means we can control what you want to make public and what not. So two things. First one, self-contained independent components, and second one, it provides great encapsulation. So let us try to understand both of these points from this code out here, because what I feel is that when you go for a JavaScript interview, this design pattern is one of the most asked one, And I'm sure that if you don't see the code right, it would be very difficult for you to explain the interviewer what exactly module pattern means. Module design pattern is a combination of IFI and closures. IFI helps for creating logical namespaces, which further organizes your code and makes it structured and organized, while closures helps for implementing good encapsulation. So through encapsulation, we can control what is to be shown and what is to be hidden. You can see out here we have a sample code. So by IFI, we can go and we can create logical namespaces, right? So here you can see on the code out here we have customer functionality and we have supplier functionality. So by using IFI, I can now create a namespace wherein I can put the customer. So what I can do is I can go and I can say here where cust namespace, and by using an IFI, I can just go and create a namespace out here. So you can see here by using an IFI, I have created a logical namespace. In the same way, what I can do is I can do the same for supplier as well, right? So for supplier, I can go and I can say this is the supplier namespace, and so you can see here we have two namespaces, logical namespaces, customer namespace and supplier namespace right now, and the customer has all the customer functionality while the supplier has all the supplier functionality, right? Now by using closures, we can reveal or we can show only what we want. For example, you can see we have customer and invoices. So customer and customer invoices, we want to expose that, but we don't want to expose customer validation. Customer validation is used by customer and customer invoices functions to do validation. So this we don't want to expose, but we want to go and expose both of this out, right? So for that, what you can do is you can say return, and you can say here expose out customer and expose out customer invoices. So that's why it is also termed as revealing pattern. Why? Because you are revealing what you want, right? So you can see by using IFI, immediately invoked function expression, we are creating namespaces, while by using closures, we are exposing what we want. We are encapsulating, things which are complicated. So module design pattern or module revealing design pattern is a combination of immediately invoked function expression and closures, and we get two big advantages. One is logical grouping, better structured code, and second one is good encapsulation. We can control what to be shown and what to be hidden. So we can now go and say that from the cust namespace, go and create an object of customer. This will work, right? So if you try to run this, you can see that there is no problem, right? But if you go now and if you try to create the object of customer validation, it will not work. So you will see that we have an exception out here. There is nothing called as customer validation. Why? Because it is now internal. So remember, in the interview, when somebody will ask you about closure, two things should come out. Better code management because of IFI, and good encapsulation because of closures. What are the various ways of creating JavaScript objects? Now there are 4 ways of creating JavaScript objects. The first one is by using literal. So you can go and you can define a name and a value, and you can create a literal object. For example, you can see here in this line number 11, I'm creating a patient object with the name property and the address property. And if you want to go and if you want to add logic and functions, you can just say pat.admit, that is patient.admit, and write the logic whatever you want to write. So the first one is by using literal. Just by using the name and the value, you create the property, and if you want to write a function or if you want to write a logic, you just attach it. The second way is by using object.create. So by using object.create, you can create an instance from the current object. For example, you can see Pat is an object. From that, I want to create a fresh object. I will say object.create and I will create pat new, right? So by using object.create, you can create an instance from the current object. The third one is by using functions, or I will say constructor way. So in the interview, please try to use proper technical vocabulary. So rather than saying functions, say constructor. So in the constructor way, what we do is we create a function and we define the properties, we define the methods, and then we go and we create the instance. And the last one is by using ES6 syntaxes. So in ES6, we have a class keyword. So you can go and you can write a class here, and then you can go and you can define the properties and you can create an instance of the class, right? So there are 4 ways of creating JavaScript objects: literal, by using the name and the value and attaching the functions on runtime; object.create, create the instance from the current object; constructor way of creating the object, that means by using functions; and last one is by using the class keyword, which was introduced in ES6. No JavaScript interview is complete without a question on inheritance and prototype. So in this section, we will try to answer 3 connected questions around inheritance and prototype. The first one is, how can we do inheritance in JavaScript? Second, what exactly is this prototype object? And the last one, explain prototype chaining. How can we do inheritance in JavaScript? Inheritance in JavaScript is done by using prototype object. Inheritance in JavaScript uses object inheritance or prototypical inheritance. So as compared to other languages, where we have class inheritance, here we do object inheritance. Now this is a very important statement, and I feel that every JavaScript interviewer likes to hear this statement, right? So just make sure that you actually send a message to the interviewer that yes, you know that inheritance in JavaScript happens through the prototype object, and inheritance is object based. It is object inheritance and not class inheritance as compared to other programming languages where we have a class keyword. So now let us try to understand inheritance in JavaScript by a simple example. So you can see here there is a function employee here. So you can see there is an employee function out here. It has name, it has do work, and it has attendance, right? And we are creating a manager function out here. This manager has a cabin, and it is actually also having do work, but his work is to manage teams, right? So in general, we say employee will do basic work, but when we talk about manager, we say that they will do management of a team, right? And it also has some extra properties here called as cabin, right? So now if you want to say that, okay, manager inherits from employee, or if you want to say that manager is a child of employee, what you will do is you will say manager.prototype point towards the employee instance. Remember I said object inheritance. So you can see here manager.prototype point towards the employee instance. By doing so, you are saying that manager is a child of employee. So that means that everything what belongs to the employee out here, the manager will get it, but he will also add his own properties like cabin, and also he will override something, which is there in the parent. For example, in the parent, we have this do work, which does the basic work. But when it comes to manager out here, that do work is overridden and it is saying manager's team. So let us try to understand this program by debugging out here. Remember, the whole goal of showing you the demo is that once the demo is understood, you can speak very properly with the interviewer. You can debate as well, right? So that's why I'm trying to show the demo out here. So you can see here, I'm creating the employee object. Look at this. This is the employee object, which has name, which has do work, and which has attendance, right? And if you say manager's prototype points towards the employee object, then what happens is, look at this. So manager has its own features, right? So you will see here, this is manager. So manager has cabin. It also has do work, but you can see there is an object here called as prototype. Remember that this prototype object is present in every JavaScript object, right? So every JavaScript object has a prototype. So if you see here this prototype, in the prototype we are having employee. So employee has attendance, employee has name, employee has do work, right? So now what happens is manager has the name property. It also has the cabin property. The name property he gets from the parent. Cabin property is his own, right? And when you call the do work function, it will execute this do work and not the do work of the employee. When you call the attendance, because the manager object does not have an attendance, it will fall back to the attendance of the prototype object. So the crux here is that this prototype object is, helps you to do inheritance, right? So if you see here now, if I go here and if I say attendance, right, it goes to the parent. You can see it is going to the parent here because the manager object does not have anything about attendance, right? So this executes, great. But if you now say do work, because do work is present in the manager, he will not execute the do work of the employee. So if you see here, when you say do work, it goes to the manager function, but not to the employee, right? And there it is. Okay. So that's how inheritance is done in JavaScript. It is done by using object inheritance. It is done by using prototype object. So the employee object was assigned to the prototype object of manager, and that's what made manager as the child of the employee. One of the other debates or discussions which happens during JavaScript interview is around the prototype object. So let us try to see how we can solidify our debate around the same. So point number one, every JavaScript object has a prototype object. So when you create a JavaScript literal object or when you create a JavaScript constructor object, it will have a prototype object internally. It is an inbuilt thing, given by JavaScript. So you can see here, I've created the employee object out here. This employee has a prototype object. If you create the manager object, it will also have a prototype object. Point number two, prototype object works like a linked list. So basically what happens is when you say that this is the employee object and it is pointing towards the prototype object of manager, towards the prototype object of this manager object. So what happens now? This is the manager object out here, you can see, and the manager object has now a linked list object of employee. So what happens? Let us say that if you go and if you call the name property on the manager, right? So the manager does not have the name property. So what it will do, it will say that, okay, the manager does not have the name property. It will go up the prototype chain and it will say, okay, do you have the name property? Then the employee object says, yes, I have the name property, and it is used. For example, now let us look at cabin. If you see cabin, right, it says, okay, cabin, it is available out here. He will not go up the prototype chain. Look at do work. The employee also has do work and the manager also has do work. So first the do work will be searched inside the manager object. If he gets it, he will not go to the prototype object. And if there are any function, for example, let us say if I put here one function called as function one. So if the function one is not available inside manager, first it will try to search the function one inside manager. If he does not get, he goes to the top level object, employee prototype. He does not get. And then he goes to the employee's prototype object. And there also he does not get it. You can see the employee also has a prototype object. There also he does not get it. It will throw up an exception. So basically this prototype object works like a linked list. That's why it is termed as prototype chaining. Prototype chaining. So it will first try to search that property or the function in the current object. If it does not get it, it goes and sees the prototype and tries to find it. If it does not get it there, it will throw up an exception. So prototype chaining means it is nothing but, wherein one object is inheriting from another object by using the prototype object of JavaScript, and it is like a linked list, and that's why it is termed as prototype chaining. Explain let keyword. Let keyword was introduced in year 6, and let keyword helps you to create block level scoped local variable. Let keyword helps you to create block level scoped local variable. Means what? You can see here we have this test function, right? So inside this test function we have two scope. One scope is the function level scope from this curly bracket to this curly bracket, and the next is a if level scoped from this curly bracket to this curly bracket. And you can see here we have created two local variables out here, one which is at the function level, we say here let x is equal to 10, and one which is at the if scope, at the if level, right, where we are saying let x is equal to 2. So because we have used a let keyword, right, this x equal to 10, this x is local to the test function. This x where we said let x equal to 2 is local to the if block level scope. So from this curly bracket to this curly bracket, right? So both of the x are actually different. So if you see here, I say let x is equal to 10. So this x is equal to 10 is from this block level scope to this block level scope. From this function level block level scope till this block level scope. But when I go inside this and when I execute x is equal to 2, now this x equal to 2, this x, let x equal to 2, scope is from this curly bracket to this curly bracket. If I come out again, right, if I come out again, you can see now x is now again 10. Why x is 10? Because now this let x equal to 10 is applicable. So let keyword helps you to create block level scoped local variable. Block level means from whichever curly bracket inside which you have declared the let is the scope of that variable, nothing beyond that. Are variables with the let keyword hoisted? Now, if you remember in one of the previous questions, we discussed about hoisting. Hoisting is nothing but, wherein the variable declarations are moved to the top. So if you see here down at line 13, we have var y equal to 10. So there are two parts to this. One is var y, which is the declaration, and y equal to 10, which is the assignation, the assigning of the value or initializing the value, right? So just the declaration, that is var y, is moved to the top. So it is moved before the value is assigned. So if you try to now access this value y out here, it comes undefined. So by default, what happens in var, the value of y is assigned undefined. It is assigned undefined. Please understand, undefined is a kind of a value. So the question here is that what happens for let x equal to 10? In case of let keyword, is the variable hoisted, right? So the answer is yes, the variables are hoisted, but they are not initialized with a value. Please note, for var y, the y is initialized with a value undefined. After line number 13, the y will get a value 10. So in case of var, what happens? The variables are hoisted and also they are initialized with the value undefined. In case of let also the variables are hoisted, but they are not assigned with any value. So what happens is when you try to go and access x, it gives you a reference error. You can see it. See here, it's showing a reference error. It says cannot access x before initialization, right? It does not say that x does not exist. It says that it is not initialized. So yes, in case of let keyword also hoisting happens, but there is no default value assigned. In case of var, there is a value assigned which is undefined. After line number 13, the value becomes y equal to 10, right? So repeating the answer, in let also we do have hoisting, but the value is not assigned. So you will get an reference error, and it says that it cannot access x because it is not initialized. Around the same concept of let keyword and hoisting, there is another concept which is connected, and that is temporal dead zone. It is very much possible that interviewer can ask this question as a connected question to the let keyword hoisting. So let us try to answer this question. Temporal dead zone is the period, or it is a state of a variable when the variables are named into the memory. So they have a name assigned to the memory, but they are not declared and initialized with a value. I repeat the answer. Temporal dead zone is the period, or it is the state of the variable when the variables are named in the memory, but not declared and initialized with a value. And during this period, if you try to access the variable, you will get an error. So here is the sample code which I'm running. So you can see in line number 16, I'm saying let x is equal to 10. So now what happens? This x gets hoisted. Hoisted means the variable are moved at the top, right? So it gets hoisted, but it is not initialized with a value. So when I try to access this x, before this statement of before this statement at line number 16, I will get an exception. So if you see here, I get an exception out here. And if you read this exception very clearly, it says that I cannot access X. He does not say that X is not available. He does not say that X is not there. It says that X is there, but it is not initialized. Look at that message. It is not initialized. So temporal dead zone is that state of the variable. It is a state of the variable when the variables are there in the memory. It has a name in the memory, but it does not have a value. So when you try to access them, it gives an error. So for this statement, like let X is equal to 10, for this variable, the temporal dead zone is from 10 to 15. So from line number 10 to 15 is the temporal dead zone for let X is equal to 10. In the same way, you can see I've created a function here called as test, right? And in that I am saying let Y equal to 10. So the temporal dead zone for Y equal to 10, let Y equal to 10 is from 18 to line number 21. So before this, if you try to access this variable Y, you will get an error. Why? Because the variable is there in memory. It is hoisted, but it is not initialized. So temporal dead zone is nothing but it is that section, it is that time, when the variables are named in the memory, but they are not initialized. And it's a good feature, because what's the point of accessing a variable which is not initialized with a value? It can lead to a buggy code. What's the difference between declaring variables by using let versus declaring variables by using var? Now this question can be very confusing, and with all respect, specifically for developers whose English is a second language, it can be something very difficult to express technically and properly, right? So let us try to create a focused discussion out here. So I feel personally that two big differences should come out, or rather I will say every interviewer at least expects two big differences. The first one is the way scoping rules are in var, and the second one is the way variable initialization happens between var and let. So first difference is around the scoping rules, and the second difference is around the way variables are initialized and declared. So let's first start with scoping rules. Variables declared by var keyword are scoped to the immediate function body. Variables declared by the var keyword are scoped to the immediate function body, while let keywords are scoped to the immediate enclosing block, right? Or it is more block scope, right? So let me try to explain this. So first thing, when you say a block, what does a block means? A block means that when you start the curly bracket and when you end the curly bracket. So this is a block. So you can see in our code out here, there is one block which is this, the if condition block. Another one is the function block, right? So the start of the curly bracket and the end of the curly bracket, the respective curly bracket start and end is one block. So when it comes to let keyword is very, very strict. It is the variables of let keyword are scoped to the immediate enclosing block. Means what? For example, look at this line number 14 out here. We are creating a variable called as y by using the let keyword. So this y variable is only accessible from this curly bracket to this curly bracket. So the immediate scope of this y keyword, right, of the y variable is this curly bracket. So the scope is only from here to here. But in case of x, for the x variable, the scope is the function. So this curly bracket, or at the function scope. So from this curly bracket to this curly bracket, this x will be accessible. So x will be accessible inside this scope as well as outside. But the y will be accessible only within this scope. So if you see here, this program is running. So y is initialized, x is initialized. And now outside, when I try to access x, x will be available because x has now been, the scope is now at the function level. So if you run this, there is no problem, getting the output. The x is 10, right? But now if you see y, the y you won't be able to access. You can see we have got an error here saying that y is not defined, right? So in other words, y scope was only from here to here. But in case of x, the x went to the function scope. So first one is the scoping rules. variables declared by var keyword have a function scope, while let variables are scoped to the immediate enclosing block. I repeat this, let keywords are scoped to the immediate enclosing block. That's why we say it is a block scope. The second big difference between the var and the let variable creation is that how the variables are initialized during the hoisting phase. So already we have discussed hoisting in the previous part of the questions, right? We said that hoisting is nothing but when the variables, is nothing but, it is a process where the compiler moves the variable declaration at the top. So you can see on the screen in line number 16 and 17, we have declared two variables, y and x, but both of these variables will get hoisted. In other words, you can access them in line number 14 and 15. So hoisting is a process where the variable declaration are moved to the top. So hoisting happens for both of them. Hoisting happens for var keyword also. It happens for let also. So variables created by both var and let, the variables will be hoisted. But in case of var, the variable will be initialized with the value undefined. The variables will be initialized with the value undefined. But in case of let keyword, the variables will not be initialized with any value, and because of that, if you try to access a let keyword created variable, it will throw up an exception because there is no value, right? So you can see out here, the line number 14 will be successful. You will get the value undefined, but line number 15 will throw up an exception. So if I run this, right, and if you see, you can see out here in the console, that is undefined. This is coming because of console.x. So x is hoisted and initialized, but look at y. The y variable is also hoisted. It is showing up exception here that I cannot access before initialization. Please note, it is not saying that y is not existing. It is saying it is not initialized. So here what is happening? Yes, the y is also hoisted, but it does not have any value. But in case of var, it has a value undefined, so it does not throw up an exception. So we can think that let is more strict in terms of scoping and initialization. Let keyword is like saying that the variables are created when it is needed. I like this sentence. Variables are created when it is needed, right? So now let us try to put a right answer from the interview perspective. Var keyword is a function scope. Var keyword is function scope, right? While let is block scope. While let keyword is a block scope. In var, variables are initialized in hoisting with undefined. In case of let, variables are not initialized with any value in the hoisting phase. So when we try to access the variable, it throws up an error. So when you're answering this question, remember two perspectives. One is scope and another one is how the initialization happens in hoisting. So var, function scope, let, block scoped. In var, variable is hoisted plus initialized, but in case of let, the variable is only hoisted but not initialized. Many times interviewer can ask tricky questions, and this question is one of them. This question basically tests your knowledge around numerical data types and also the awareness of how unwanted concatenation can lead to buggy code. So you can see here, the first one here, we have declared two variables where d equal to 10 value, and we are saying where d1 equal to 10. So if we say d plus d1, what will be the output? Now remember that this d and d1 are strings. Why it is a string? Because you put the value in the double quote. So what will happen here? It will actually do concatenation and not arithmetic addition. So the output of this will be 10, 10, 1, 0, 1, 0, right? So if you look at the console, the value is 1, 0, 1, 0. So what the interviewer is expecting is that he's expecting that that when two strings, even though when we do a plus, they will do concatenation and not arithmetic addition, right? Now look at 13 and 14. If these were numbers, right? Yes, then 1 plus I1. Now at this moment they are numbers. You know why? Because we have not given a double quote out here. So this will show properly 20, right? So this is arithmetic addition and this is concatenation. So the interviewer wants that, yes, you should know the difference between addition and concatenation and the effect because of the data types. Now you can see one more tricky one which they can give, console.log. So 1 plus 1 plus 4, what will it give, right? Now remember that this 1 and 1 are numbers, so it will do arithmetic addition, so it will become 1 plus 1 is 2. But look at that 4 is a string, so basically it will do concatenation. So it will be 1 plus 1, 2, and concatenate 2 with 4, which is actually 24. So actually if you see the output out here, the value is 24, right? So whenever you are asked this tricky question, just remember what is the data type, and according to data type, then think about concatenation or arithmetic operation. So that brings us to the end of part 1. Now in part 2, we will focus on ES6 questions. ES6 has now been implemented by big browsers, and interviewers expect that developers should have knowledge around the same. So thank you very much. Happy learning and happy job hunting. And just to reiterate, if you go and if you share this video on your LinkedIn or on your Twitter or on your Facebook, you would get this beautiful ebook for free. So this ebook and the source code. So whatever source code I have shown in this video, even that you will get, right? So go ahead and share this video on your LinkedIn or on your Facebook or on your Twitter, and send us a mail at questpond@questpond.com, and you get this ebook and source code for free. Thank you very much.